Hi guys, so if you missed the lab from today, let me give you a quick overview of what we covered. So this was the application that we're working on. As you can see, there's a lot going on here, but we're going to just focus on the main.py, which is the bulk of where everything kind of comes in together. And here's an image of kind of how this entire workflow operates. And I'm going to focus on just kind of give you an idea of like what the building blocks are right now. So we're building with Crew AI, and what this actually is composed of is two crews. And crew A here, you can see it's made up of two agents. If you scroll down, crew B is made up of two agents as well. And so what this thing does is that there is a flow kickoff, which is providing a set of data. And this data is kind of like something like a business process or an SOP. And the idea here is that once you provide this information, we have one set of crew that then basically breaks it down into certain steps, and then another one analyzes these steps. What we're trying to do with this is to analyze if there's any inefficiencies in this particular business process, okay? And this can be an operational process, for instance, inside an organization. Lots of different use cases. It could be something like in a restaurant, whatever it might be that you follow through a step-by-step procedure. And then once that processing is done by the first crew, that gets handed on to a manager agent, and that reviews it and decides a route and decides what needs to happen next. So it's three different options that can happen here. One, it can be approved that this particular analysis is correct and we do need to make these kind of changes to the process. Or the agent decides, you know what, we need a human in the loop here. And so we then pass it on to a human to verify or add any other notes or exceptions or stuff, and then that can get passed on, or it gets fully rejected. So let's focus on what happens if it gets passed on to a human. The human, they can read through sort of a preliminary report on what this crew put together, and then basically as a human, then you can decide, okay, well, are we going to approve that or we're going to reject that? And so let's say it's approved, then it gets sent over to crew B, which then takes that report and then redesigns the entire process, the business process, in the more optimized way. So we have a redesign agent that takes that in and redesigns the entire process. And for instance, if there's efficiencies and stuff, it looks at it. And then we also have an implementation planner that takes the output from the redesign agent and then creates an implementation plan as well. And then finally, the whole thing is then returned as a final report that can be looked at with all the information in there, the implementation plan, everything like that, okay? So that's at a high level, that's kind of how it works. And so if we look at, for instance, our main, I'll just kind of go up from the top down, sort of like how this whole thing kind of works. So we have here, right at the top, we have our libraries that we're importing into Python. So the first part is this pathlib import path. So this is a built-in Python class that we're going to import in order to then store the final report output onto disk. Then over here, we have sort of our imports that are coming in from Crew AI, Flow, and these are quite important. And so the base class of all this is called Flow. And the workflows that we're going to be utilizing inherits from this flow. The next thing over here is something called persistence. You can think of it kind of like memory, and information from one state feeds into another. The next thing over here is that we're importing our crews. So this is the discovery crew that we have, Crew A, and this is the redesign crew, Crew B, from our diagram, okay? And over here, we're also importing our manager as well, which is going to then make our routing decisions. And we also are bringing in a function, which we define somewhere else, where it's going to look at some of the pain points with regards to the original workflow that we inserted, basically our input, and it's going to then generate some pain points with it as well. And so over here, as you can see, also we have a sample process description. So if I go over here, we have a sample process description, and that is being fed. This is what I meant by business process that one can map out. So it's basically discussed here, okay? And let's go back to main. And then this is the name as well. And then we have here something very important. So this is our state model. And essentially this is a class that we made in another file. And what this is for is this represents the state of this workflow. So as you can kind of see here, we have persist here, and this is basically a very important part. This is a decorator that basically modifies the behavior of the class to basically say that, okay, this is going to manage persistence. This class is going to manage persistence for every stage of this flow. And so we dig a little deeper. You can see the class is process auto flow, and then we have our flow, and then we have our state here as well. And so the flow class here, it tells us that we're going to create a flow here, and it's going to use our process auto state as its state and also schema when it comes to data. And then as we kind of go over here, we can see that this is a helper function that is for the pain points that we generate. And so basically it puts it in a certain format that we can then review. And that'll be useful later on for the agents, but also for the manager as well. So here's where everything starts. This is where it starts our flow. And you can see here, it starts with gather input. So this is that original process that gets fed in. And there's two ways for this to kind of happen. One is with this process that I already had in the working directory. Otherwise, there's a way to kind of send this through basically API, let's say, and then it would be in the form of a JSON, and then it would get used in the rest of the flow. But since we're using one that already is done in the working directory, this probably will get skipped. And I'll show you the actual function that this is running at the bottom because I placed it at the bottom. So it starts from here, and as you can see here, the listener is saying that we're going to take the outputs from this function here. The gather inputs get fed over here, and then this is the listener. Basically says that once this finishes, this is going to start. And this, you can see here, this listener, this listen, it continues on, and then there's a router over here. So the next step is the discovery crew that basically takes in what this particular state did and feeds it back over here for processing. And from here, we're going to build our manager agent, and we're going to save it as manager, and then it's going to use the information it got from the crew and also the pain points to make a decision. And you can see there's a decision and there's a rationale. Okay. And then from here, that's fed over here where there's a router that this determines which kind of the direction things to go. That can be we need a human, which then goes over here and then get passed on to the human, and then the human can approve, or you can then reject it. And you can see approve or continue redesign. And then from the human side, the human can then decide there's another router where they can reject or approve. And if they reject or approve, depending where, there's a direction that they're going to go. And in any case, if it gets approved by the manager or it gets approved by a human, then it goes over here where this information, then the final report generation begins. Okay, you can see here, this is the route it's going to go if it's rejected. And if it's approved, then you can see that we are sending it to the redesign crew, which is then going to then process it. And then over here is where the final report is generated. And you can see here, this is the report function, and it basically encompasses all this here. And then the report's generated, and you can see that we have that file that is going to be written, and it's going to be on our disk. And you can see that there's a comment that gets printed as well. And then over here, this function is where essentially when you call this main to run, and Crew AI, we do it Crew AI run. This function right here, kickoff, runs, and then basically it creates an instance of the workflow that we just created up there, and then basically executes the workflow. And here is just generating a visualization of this workflow. We can also do that as well. And remember I said above that you can send the business process through API. Well, here it is, the run trigger. So yeah, it seems like a lot thing going on, but in reality it's just pretty straightforward. And you can see this diagram now, it's a lot more clear in terms of what's happening. And yeah, so that's what we did in the lab today. And thanks for listening. See you again.